Hey, what's going on, everybody? And welcome back to College Football Red Zone, your exclusive home for 7+ hours of commercial-free college football. I remember that when we started this season out, we started off with 136 teams that had, dreams and aspirations of a successful season. What that successful season looks like was always different, depending on which program that you ended up rooting for. But now we are down to two. Congratulations to the Miami Hurricanes, who came in as the 10 seed. A little bit of controversy with Miami getting into the college football playoff, getting in at the 11th hour over Notre Dame, although it was warranted with that head to head. And then, of course, congratulations as well to the number one seeded Indiana Hoosiers, who beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, who beat Alabama, beat them convincingly, beat Oregon, and beat them convincingly as well. Both teams deserving to be here because that is the purpose of having more than just four teams in the college football playoff, right? You're talking about settling it on the field, and these two teams settled it on the field. These are the two best teams in the country, and I'm very excited to kind of go to preview this game and very excited to watch this game unfold Monday night, 7:30 Eastern. It's going to be actually probably a little bit closer to 8 o'clock. 7:30 is when the festivities start on the field. So go ahead and buckle up, guys. We're going to have a good one here. A little bit of a one-off as before I jump into it, I really want to appreciate your guys' patience. Haven't really been able to preview many games over the past few weeks because I've been sick. My family's been sick as well. Same with the wife and kid, right? So we're all back in full health. So I'm finally happy to finally, be able to do some previews again. I really miss doing this. And if you're watching this, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching us on a different platform, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button as well. I really do appreciate it. Now, let's go ahead and get into it, right? Because on the service, so we've seen a lot of talk about the national championship game already, and what we've seen for the national championship game is seems that Indiana is going to come in as a heavy favorite, and even though I understand how they looked in the Alabama game and in the how they looked in the Oregon game most recently as well. I found it a little surprising to see, what the line was like. But then I really looked at our model, and I usually don't do this for game previews, but I want to show really how daunting it looks, in this national championship game. I'm gonna go ahead and put the model up here early. So I just checked FanDuel right before pressing the record button. Indiana is listed as an 8.5 point favorite as of this afternoon. But it's even more drastic when you're taking a look at, what the model here internally at College Football Red Zone, what that has in store, right? So the model right now actually has Indiana as a 14.5 point favorite. We're talking about a two-touchdown favorite. And to keep in mind, you guys, the model actually does bake it as if this was a de facto home game for Miami because it's a different situation to where, this is not, oh, a team just has to make a much more shorter drive than the other team. No kidding. Miami is playing this game in their home stadium, or at least where they play their home games. So, baked in, even with that baked in, baking in home field advantage that you would normally see more often in the regular season, Miami is listed as a two-touchdown underdog. And again, this is with home field advantage. If this was treated as a straight up neutral site game, which you can certainly make that argument because what we've seen from Indiana in the Rose Bowl as well as Indiana in the Peach Bowl against Oregon, those Indiana fans travel extremely well. So we're talking about Indiana possibly being as high as an 18 point favorite if you're looking at it purely from the perspective of if this was a neutral site game. So it looks like a daunting task to where Miami's going to come in as a heavy underdog that's reflected in the betting markets. But with that being said, I think we need to stop ourselves from rushing and handing the national championship trophy to the Indiana Hoosiers. So what I would like to do is because it seems so lofty in terms of the odds, Indiana listed at least in the eyes of College Football Red Zone, having them listed as more than a two touchdown favorite. what I want to do instead is really want to lay out, hey, this is what it's going to look like. What is the scenario in which the underdog is going to come out on top and beat the favorite, not only to win a big game, but win our sports national championship here in the 2025 college football season. So I want to go look at it from that perspective purely. So to go ahead and get things started from that perspective. So one thing that I found very interesting that they mentioned in the broadcast in the midst of Indiana providing that quintessential BTA against Oregon. One thing that they did mention in the broadcast is that Indiana does not have tremendous depth, right? So at least on the defensive side of the ball. So they're now don't get me wrong, their front 11, their starting 11 defense obviously is an insanely talented defense. We're talking about a defense which, according to ESPN, as of right now, Indiana is listed as the number two scoring defense in the entire country, at least as of right now. The only defense that has allowed less points than Indiana, those 11 points per game, is that Ohio State defense, not 9 points per game. So, of course, Indiana has shown that they can win against really strong defenses. They took on, obviously, the number one defense in the country in Ohio State. But Miami is not that bad defensively either. This is a top five defense in their own right. This is going to be the best defense that Indiana is going to encounter in the college football playoff. So I do want to keep that in mind. And another thing that I do want to keep in mind as well is that Indiana only plays 13 guys consistently. So beyond their starting 11, which obviously is one of the best starting 11s in the country, they're ranked number two defensively as of right now. What I do want to say is beyond that starting 11, there is not a lot of depth, or at least reliable depth that Indiana can reasonably rely on. And so, why does that matter? Because what does Miami like to do offensively? What Miami really loves to do offensively is Miami, not only do they want to run the football, but they do also want to make sure that they run the football specifically down your throat. And we have seen this particularly in the last two playoff games that we've seen, and to a degree that would also apply to the Texas A&M game as well, if you want to, account for the Texas A&M game, even though that was an extremely ugly game, between Miami and Texas A&M. So in the three playoff games, what they have done in terms of running the football, they have ran for over 150 yards in terms of running the football. So what they were able to do is, for the most part, they were able to get major rushing success against Texas A&M, including an extremely long run that ended up setting up the game-winning touchdown for Miami, beating Texas A&M on the road. So they had success against Texas A&M. Ohio State, a team that Miami played up against in the quarterfinal. This is the best defense in America, by the way. They ran for over 150 yards. And they are not afraid to run the ball either. So they ran for over 150 yards against Indiana, or not, excuse me, Indiana. They ran for over 150 yards against Ohio State. They ran for over 150 yards, almost 200 yards against Ole Miss. And they're not afraid to run the football either. This was a team that has ran the ball 25, 30, and in the case of the Ole Miss game, they ran the ball for 51 times. So, hypothetically, if Miami can keep it reasonably close against Indiana and allow themselves the opportunity to lean on that running game, use that offensive line that we've seen bully Ohio State in the trenches, we've seen them bully Ole Miss in the trenches as well, you could put Indiana possibly in a compromising position in terms of maybe having to rely on that depth a little bit more. But that's going to be really important. That running game is going to have to get going early and often. If it gets into a situation where Indiana is able to hold up defensively, and Listen, Indiana, one of the best rush defenses in the country. This is a top five rush defense that we're talking about. It's a game where in Miami's gonna have to win in that battle in the trenches. If it's even, or even if Indiana wins in the trenches, then it's gonna be a long night for Miami offensively because we have seen Carson Beck be able to go out and make some big plays. We saw this in the semifinal in that final offensive drive that Miami had against Ole Miss. But at the same time, if you become a one-dimensional team, they're going to make you pay for it. And that's what we saw, exactly what we saw from Oregon, where they did have some early success in running the football, but because of the lack of depth that they had in the running back room, as well as the game getting out of hand extremely quickly as well, we saw a situation where Oregon had to be a little bit more one dimensional. And from that point on, it was barbecue chicken in Indiana, not only winning those games, but they won convincingly. But Miami does have the style play where at least that portion is going to be tested, but the Miami Hurricanes, that offensive line has to win against Indiana's front seven, as well as make sure that Carson Beck is able to have enough time in the pocket to throw. I mean, those are that's obviously that's pretty obvious, but most importantly, got to get that run game going if you're Miami and not even break off a ton of explosive runs, but kind of what they did in the Ole Miss game where, you're constantly getting, 4 to 5 yards, which is what Miami did, get themselves in third and short situations. So that's going to be the most important thing, right? Making sure that you are winning in the ground game. The Miami offensive line has to win over Indiana's front seven. That's number one. And then the second aspect of it is obviously you have to make sure that you're playing a clean game. The Miami did beat Ole Miss 31 to 27. And even though they were able to dominate the time possession, Miami with over 41 minutes of time possession, Ole Miss didn't really have much of a chance to possess the ball, left with only 18 and a half minutes of possession in the entire game. At the same time, Ole Miss was able to hung around because of the miscues that we saw from Miami in the semifinal. They had double-digit penalties. They had more than twice as many penalties and more than double the penalty yardage that Ole Miss had. And also they had a loss in the turnover battle. They were -1 in the turnover margin, an interception that Carson Beck thrown, which what granted was tipped at the line of scrimmage. Don't get me wrong there. So it wasn't necessarily Carson Beck's fault that the pass got intercepted. It gets batted at the line of scrimmage. A little bit more bad luck for Carson Beck, but an interception was still thrown, and they still lost that turnover battle. So you really looking at the Miami game and that performance against Ole Miss, they played probably realistically a C plus to B minus type of game. Now that was good enough to beat Ole Miss, given that Ole Miss stylistically was gonna have a hard time matching up against Miami's offensive line. So that C plus and B minus type of performance was good enough for Ole Miss. But as we've seen already with Indiana, with how they dominated in the first couple of playoff games, a C plus to B minus effort is not going to be enough. Why? Because what Indiana does is they absolutely do not beat themselves on their own, right? So check out the games for Indiana against Alabama and our games against Oregon, right? So in the Indiana game, or for Alabama, the Indiana Hoosiers, they had one penalty. It was a holding call that was brought back for 10 yards, and they didn't turn the ball over at all. They actually won the turnover battle. They were +1. As for the Oregon game, the most recent game that we saw, again, Indiana was extremely clean. They didn't turn the ball over at all. They only had 5 penalties for 23 yards, and they were +3 in the turnover margin, which is a big reason again for why we saw that game get so out of hand so quickly in that Peach Bowl last time that we saw Indiana take the field. So it's very crystal clear, and it's been mentioned in a couple of different places. You are not going to go out there And Indiana is going to make enough mistakes to where Indiana is going to lose the game, right? This is clearly an extremely well coached team from Kirk Cinetti. So if you're Miami and you want to pull this upset off, you can't rely on Indiana to make mistakes, or at least not multiple mistakes. You have to go out there and beat them straight up. So what does that look like in terms of keeping things clean from that standpoint, right? That's looking as if you got to make sure that you're at least similar to Indiana from a penalty standpoint, and you need to at worst be -1 because Oregon, even after they threw that first pick six, if they just had that turnover, it might have looked a much more competitive first half, and we would have had ourselves a little bit more of a competitive ball game deep into the second half. But because of that cascading effect of the two other first half turnovers, that's when it was barbecue chicken, and you give Indiana a short field, or in the case of that pick six in the first play of the game, you get a defensive touchdown. So the second most important thing is keeping things clean from the mental aspect, keeping it clean in terms of being similar to Indiana when it comes to penalties, and also at the same time, keeping it at least similar or at the very worst, -1 in the turnover differential, which is a little bit harder to predict, but you got to be at worst -1. You got to keep it clean from that aspect. And then last but most importantly, if you're Miami, you're going to want to pull this upset off. Those pass rushers are going to have to get home. Ruber Bain is on this team obviously, and Ruber Bain, we know how great he is. He's going to be, in my opinion, a top 10 pick in the upcoming like NFL draft in the spring. But Akeem Azador, his edge mate, he's gonna have to go to work here as well. He has 10.5 sacks on the season. He's also gonna have a big game. This defensive line has to get home quickly and put pressure on Fernando Mendoza, because what we've seen from Fernando Mendoza, and we saw this in the Oregon game, he is very capable of making any throw on the field. And so if he has a clean pocket to operate from Fernando Mendoza, he's going to have time. And so if the Indiana offensive line can consistently give Fernando Mendoza time, then Fernando Mendoza is going to absolutely light it up and is going to be completely barbecue chicken from there. So that's going to be the three things if you're Miami and you want to win this game. That's what you're going to have to do. Number one, make sure that your run game is going, and that offensive line, when it comes to those rushing plays, is beating Indiana's front seven consistently. You also have to make sure that you're playing a clean game. That's number two. That's similar in penalties and similar in turnovers. -1 at the worst when it comes to turnover differential. And then finally, the third most important thing, Massador and Bain Jr. in that Miami defensive line, they got to get home and put pressure on Fernando Mendoza. You cannot allow him to give time because he has the ability to make any NFL level throw. We've seen this. He has more passing touchdowns than incompletions in the CFP. These are the best 12 teams in the sport right now, at least from a college football perspective. And in the two games that Fernando Mendoza has played in, he has 8 passing touchdowns, and I believe it was 5 to 6 incompletion. That is insane. That is something that we rarely see. It reminds me of seeing Joe Burrow go off in 2019. It gives me that kind of reminder. So, with that said, what do I think this game is going to go? And to be honest with you, I've seen a lot of people pick Indiana. I'm going to go against the grain in this one. I'm going to disagree with the better judgment of my model, and I'm going to pick Miami to win this game outright. Here's why I'm going to pick Miami to win this game outright. I personally believe that Miami does have what it takes on its roster to stand up to the physicality to Indiana. I think that Miami also has, generally speaking, the better athletes and what Indiana has and what they're able to employ as well. And so those two, and they also have a real experienced quarterback in Carson Beck. So because of Carson Beck, you have a guy that has been in these high pressure and high leverage situations, such as being in a national championship. He's been in multiple national championship games back in his time in Georgia, so he's seen firsthand, learning from a um, a Stetson Bennett in terms of how to prepare for a national championship game, and I think that goes into fruition. So, with more national championship experience on the roster than what Indiana has, I think that goes into play as well. That being said, I think it's going to be an incredibly close game. I don't think there's going to be a situation where Indiana is. I don't think Indiana is going to blow out Miami like it's been made out to be for by certain outlets. I don't think that Miami is going to blow out Indiana either. I think we're going to be in for a very competitive game. I think this is going to be at minimum. I think Miami will at least cover, but I do think Miami takes that next step from even covering to winning this game outright. It's going to go down to the last possession of the game. I'm going to go with 28 to 27 being your final score.